Hey, Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call the beginnings of the idea for an action-adventure open-world game set in New Caledonia?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Chia seeds. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I am your apparently not very creative host, Madelyn.
I'm your just vampiric host, Emma.
There we go. And thanks for tuning into the show. This week, we're going to be talking about Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain. Or the whole Legacy of Kain series, maybe. I had a real worry as I did this. I was like, what if Emma was thinking of Legacy of Kain Soul Reavers as the game? So I read up on both.
It's written down as Blood Omen because that's the first, but we'll probably talk about a few of them.
I just got scared. I got scared that I would come in having fully understood Blood Omen and you were going to be like, that doesn't even really count. And I would be like, okay. Uh-oh.
It's canon, so
yeah, it's
it
true.
does count.
And also Tchia, which is how you say it.
Yes.
Which I did put into the joke just to demonstrate
that we'd learned.
That I did learn after like 3 weeks of us being like, Tchia?
I guess I should have assumed the T was sort of unpronounced.
You do kind of,
this
is something we worked on in my voice and speech classes in college. You do sometimes, you kind of do that, it's like, it's there in the ch sound.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's there. The silent T. 2 games of very different tone and feel, I think.
What do you mean?
Yeah, you're right, not at all. They are all about using the things around you, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But look forward to vampires with gliders in approximately 40 minutes.
You know, that is a missing genre right now.
Right?
Where are my vampires with gliders?
Where you are the vampire, to be clear. I don't want my enemy I'm not ready for my enemy vampires to have gliders yet. We're gonna need a few more years.
I do think it would be funny to have enemy vampires descend upon you from the sky, though. So,
but they would do that. Okay, whatever. I'll save this for later. But like, why would a vampire have a glider? He can turn into a bat. Anyway, we'll come back to that. Before I start with the mashup, let's do it. Legacy of Kain, Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain. Both games this week, action-adventure titles, so they've got that in common. Mm-hmm. Developed by Silicon Knights, published by Crystal Dynamics for the PlayStation in 1996, ported to PC in 1997, and then never again until it appeared on GOG in 2021. I guess that's not true. Maybe you could have gotten it as a PS1 classic on PS3, but it's the same game. And so I was glad to not have to. I was glad Tchia seemed interesting to me because I was like, oh, this game was 60 hours in 1996 and I'd have to fire it up on the PS3. So I was like, okay, let's play the other one.
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
A lot of lore here.
Well, you know, it's gothic fantasy, so of course it does.
It has to have the lore.
Yeah.
But it was striking to me. Oh, man. Clickbait Boyfriend was just listening to an episode where we talked about a game with time travel in it, and he was like, Madelyn, you always say the same things about time travel. So I have to restrain myself from weighing in on time travel in Legacy of Kain.
That's not until, like, the 3rd or 4th game, though, right?
No, there is time travel in the first game.
In the first one?
Yes.
Really?
There is. Let me fill you in.
Give us our lore corner.
All right, Madelyn's
I missed
lore
the time
corner.
travel and reading about it, so
settle in. In Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain, you play as Kain, which you might think, listeners, of course, the series is, well, originally it's Blood Omen and Legacy of Kain is the subtitle, and then Legacy of Kain becomes the title moving forward. So that is itself perhaps a little confusing. But you might be thinking to yourself, of course, the name is in the title. Of course I play as that character. Listener, have you never heard of The Legend of Zelda? Come on, get with the program. But in the first one...
Literally not allowed to play Zelda.
You literally are not allowed. But in the first game, unlike in some subsequent games, you do play as Kain, formerly a nobleman, but you got killed, and you were resurrected as a vampire. And you're hoping to get some revenge and a cure in your land of Nosgoth, where you live. And in that land, the Nosgoth, the world, relies on the pillars of Nosgoth, which are each protected by a human sorcerer guardian known as the Circle of Nine. Now, years ago, vampires were like ostracized out of society to the shadows, as often happens to vampires in gothic fantasy societies. But now there's two kingdoms, Kingdom of Willendorf, which is the good guys, and the Nemesis, which, why would you name yourself this?
You were second, you know?
I'm just always baffled by kingdom. Like, I feel like there's so many fantasy kingdoms, fantasy people named like Nemesis, and it's like that. Why did you choose evil for yourself? Don't you want people?
It's not inherently evil to be somebody's nemesis,
right? But it's like you could have been rival. You know, you chose Nemesis rather than rival.
Rival's not a good name. The Kingdom of Rival? Come on, Melon.
Okay, fair enough. Anyway, way back in the past, the Guardian of Balance, Ariel, was killed. And while the Circle of Nine used to be like good guys, right? A sorcerer who was pissed about the Guardian being killed turned all the other ones crazy, corrupted the pillars. So Kain the vampire has got to fix this and kill all the Circle of Nine, like to get his revenge, but also so that new guardians can be like resurrected or reincarnated rather, to take their place and hopefully, you know, restore balance to the world. And you've got the help. There's like a human guy who helped resurrect you. You've got like a vampire mentor named Vorador. I really like the idea of a vampire mentor, by the way. That was something that I was like, that's cool. We could explore that more. Vorador is like, by the way, let the humans do their human stuff, dude. Like, leave them alone. But Kain doesn't want to stay a vampire yet, so he does not listen to them. And over the course of the game, you kill a bunch of these pillar sorcerers, but then the Nemesis army is like for real about to invade now. So you gotta postpone your pillar quest, convince the people of Willendorf to fight, and you do, but then it goes really badly. Which is bad, because that's gonna get in the way of you being able to complete your pillar stuff. But don't worry, here's where it comes in, Emma. At some point, you got like a time travel machine. So we're going to fix this. It's okay that the army got totally routed, because we are going to go back in time and kill like Nemesis, like the Nemesis, not the entire empire. The guy that the empire is named after, at the source 50 years ago. But here's the problem. At the time, he was not called the Nemesis. He was in fact then known as King William the Just. Oops. So you kill him, and you've saved Willendorf, but the problem is that now, 50 years in the past, a vampire murdered King William the Just. So all vampires, like except you and Vorador now, have been wiped out. Because in that 50 years of this new timeline, everybody hated vampires for killing their beloved king, and they killed them all. Anyway, you've been doing all of this at the advice of like an oracle guy, but then it turns out, again, spoilers here for like a 25-year-old game. We were already in some of that, but more spoilers for a 25-year-old game. The oracle who was giving you all of these instructions was actually one of the corrupted sorcerers all along. So you've been tricked. So that guy kills Vorador, and now that means that you're literally the only vampire left. And here we go. Here's where it takes a really dark turn. So you've gotten to the point, there's only one pillar left unrestored. So you've only got to kill the last sorcerer, and goodness will reign again, and balance will reign again in the world. However, this is when you have an epiphany. It's you! You're the final pillar. You're the last crazy circle member. You have somehow become the new guardian of balance, who I guess is one of the 9, maybe. And you were like born or created or something right between this guardian's death and everything being corrupted. And so all along, the way to save yourself from being a vampire is by killing yourself.
Yeah.
So you get to choose at the end whether to, kill yourself and save the world and have there be no more vampires, but like order is restored, or to just say, screw it, I'm a wild vampire man now, and live on being super powerful, which is the canon ending.
Yes. Yeah.
Which sort of surprised me. I feel like that's not usually the canon ending.
Well, I mean, it seems like you go around this game sort of effing up and being self-centered, so makes sense.
So that, I appreciated the story of the first game because I felt like, there's some wild twists and turns here, but in a wacky is wrong and campy is wrong, but in a bold way, right? We're gonna tell a weird story for you here, and we're not gonna worry that it requires time travel and vampires and a lot of haha, I wasn't who you thought I was, like 3 different times. We're just gonna go all in. And I appreciated that. And I think it gets much, much even more wilder over the course of the series.
Yes, it's very just drama-y, I think.
Yes, well, Kain is modeled on Clint Eastwood's character in Unforgiven, if that gives a sense of kind of influence and tone. Not literally, like, he doesn't look like, sorry, to be clear.
Yes, no, he doesn't look
like Clint Eastwood. He doesn't look like Clint Eastwood.
That would be funny, though.
Influenced by.
Yeah, so after the first game, there was a bit of the whole history of Silicon Knights, the original developer of the first one, appears to just be suing people and losing.
Oops.
So, after this, Crystal Dynamics published it, and there was a contract where Crystal Dynamics had right to the IP, with some, caveats of, like, their Silicon Knights always credited as, like, creating it and stuff like that. And so Crystal Dynamics started making a sequel, as with them in the developer seat, and Silicon Knights didn't like that, and so sued them for the IP, saying, like, oh, like, for various things. It seemed to be like they were stealing, like, our sequel idea, or, like, they were always intending to renege on promises that they didn't renege on, really. Seemed to be sort of just a weak case from my reading about it.
Yeah, it's especially weird because they've since been really upfront that they're like, this is not the direction we would have taken the series. And so it's interesting for the suit to rest so strongly on they stole our ideas for where to take the series, when they then say, like, over and over, like, this is not what we would have done.
Yeah, it's pretty easily traceable. Crystal Dynamics had a project called Shifter that was in development before this that became Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, so there was no real ground to stand on that front.
Shifter, by the way, the, like, biblical mythology game that I call for every time we talk about something that even vaguely touches Jesus on this show. So.
Yeah, I am Jesus Christ. It's right there, man.
I think it's not out yet, right? It's soon.
I think it's soon.
They've
released previews though, and it looks great.
Missing the Easter release date is pretty brutal, so I hope they're aiming for holiday now.
Yeah.
It does sound like, it doesn't sound like Crystal Dynamics was legally in any trouble here. It does sound like there was some shady stuff that went on, in that they basically sort of used this game to, like, sell themselves to Activision, sort of. In any case, like, they had represented themselves as the developer of the game, even though they were the publisher, and, like, Crystal Dynamics, part of the reason that this went this direction is they kind of got out of the publishing game because they wanted to develop as more their central focus, and that, like, yeah, they had sort of misrepresented that intention to SK, to Silicon Knights, and also that, like, maybe both Silicon Knights and Crystal Dynamics were simultaneously developing prototypes for the sequel for, like, the same publisher. Which is like, oh.
I don't know if Silicon Knights if they were just working on something for themselves.
This is what I read, that they were making 2 dueling prototypes, both potentially for Activision. Okay, so I've re-looked this up, and it seems like somehow there was Activision was involved in distributing the first game somehow, and it looks like there was some involvement or potential involvement of funding of a sequel, but then it's Eidos, so I don't...
Well, Crystal Dynamics was bought by Eidos, so it's not just a publishing arrangement. Eidos was publishing it because Crystal Dynamics was their studio at that point.
So it was all this drama about a publisher that ultimately wasn't even the publisher.
Yes, exactly.
So who knows?
But anyway, all I wanted to say is there was they were already working on Soul Reaver pretty soon after Blood Omen came out, and there was a longer pause than there had been, or would be in the future between the first and second, mostly because they were hashing out this legal arrangement. They just settled, I believe, so.
They did, and they settled where it was just like, oh, you just have to credit them.
Well, that was in their original contract, so they probably would have done that anyway.
I know, that's why I thought it was such a weird settlement. I was like, you got nothing out of this.
Yeah, Silicon Knights would go on to then sue Epic Games later over the Unreal Engine 3, which they would lose, I think, just straight out, and that would cause them to go out of business.
Tough break.
So they did a lot of legal battles, and were not very good at them. Regardless of whether you think they're in the right or not, they were not very good at them.
And that's not even the end of the complicated development history of this series, but I'll go back and talk about the game a little bit first before we get into the games that didn't come about over the past 20 years. So in the first game, the first Blood Omen, is 2D, top-down, like hack and slash, puzzles, dungeons, and the like gimmick of Legacy of Kain is that you're a vampire. So across pretty much all of the games, your health bar drains slowly over time, and so you have to drink, in this game, the blood of people around you to restore your HP. And there's also like poison blood that you shouldn't drink, and like magic blood from ghosts. Who knew that ghosts have blood, by the way? But sure. Which restores your HP.
Why wouldn't they have blood? Ghost
right.
blood.
That's fair. You also have the ability to shapeshift, which again is going to ruin my vampires with gliders idea later in the episode. But you can turn into a bat. You can turn into a wolf, which is confusing because vampires and werewolves usually separate things, but neither here nor there. A cloud of mist, and you can also shapeshift into a human, which also makes me feel like, well, why bother? Just stay a vampire. Why would you want to turn back? You can be a human whenever you want. You should just drink a little blood every once in a while. No big deal.
I feel like you're getting into some complicated metaphorical territory there, Madelyn.
That's fair. That's fair. Anyway, listeners, does this sound to you like a game which adults would want to play? Because that was the driving idea behind this.
It's very Game of Thronesian.
Yeah.
In vibe.
I'm not sure when the original Game of Thrones books were coming out.
I don't know either.
They did say that they were influenced by the Wheel of Time. Do you know we watched that TV?
I think those books came out before Game of Thrones. At least
yes,
a little
they did.
bit.
But it is interesting, both of these games. Okay, here's the common thread between the two games this week, is that you can definitely see both of these games as very much inspired by The Legend of Zelda, right? But this one inspired by the 90s Zelda games, and Tchia inspired by Breath of the Wild.
Well, plus some others.
Sorry, not. I'm not saying that's the only influence on either of these games.
I just mean like Wind Waker, for example.
Oh, sure, you're right, of course. But what I mean to say is like a later Zelda. I mean, Wind Waker is an earlier Zelda, but a later Zelda versus a 2D Zelda versus a 3D Zelda. Perhaps.
There you go. That works.
But I did like the description of this one as a Legend of Zelda take on a vampire action RPG, which is like good talk this core there.
And until proven otherwise, I bet they took the idea of Wolf Link from Blood Omen Legacy of Kain right back.
Let's put that out there. I'll believe
it.
It's also Legacy of Kain is an early example of a video game anti-hero, which is weird to think about now because like every character in a video game has to be an anti-hero in the year 2023. But one of the like early examples of an anti-hero hero and a morally gray hero, which is funny. It also took like 3.5 years to develop, which in the 90s might as well be like 12 years.
Yeah.
And it was showcased at the very first E3. Rest in peace.
Rest in peace. Press F in the chat.
F.
That can be for both E3 and Legacy of Kain.
Maybe. Legacy of Kain looks to be crawling out of the crypt.
Okay, so I was looking at this, and I did not look up timelines because I'm stupid, but so Crystal Dynamics put out a survey in like October 2022 that was asking about like interest in various series, including Legacy of Kain, which to be honest, does that mean anything? I don't know. Whatever. They're interested in knowing if you're interested, I guess. But when did Square Enix sell them? Was that in the summer? Was it? Were they asking us after
this was
they got sold?
Post-sale.
Post-sale. Okay. That's a little better then. Maybe.
Anyway, they put out a survey asking about interest in Legacy of Kain this fall, and they came back like a month later being like, oh my god, 100,000 people filled out this survey! Which apparently was like by a factor of 10 or a factor of 100 more people than they expected to fill out the survey. So, looks more encouraging for Legacy of Kain than it's looked in about 20 years. How about that?
Yeah. It's more a matter if Crystal Dynamics will find itself in a place where it can work on that.
That is indeed the question. Although the Embracer folks have said they're interested in, plundering the back catalogs. Not that that means anything. Maybe they'll probably continue to sell it all for parts.
They may mean that literally.
They may. Maybe they'll sell it back to Silicon Knights.
I don't think Silicon Knights exists anymore.
Maybe Silicon Knights will reform.
Maybe.
Just to purchase the Legacy of Kain IP for $2.60.
Something like that.
Anyway, despite all of this, the first game was like a huge critical or a commercial success and a reasonably critical success. People liked the story. It was just that the loading times were very long and some of the gameplay wasn't loved. But it was followed up with a bunch of sequels very quickly.
Speaking of loading times, one notable thing about Soul Reaver is...
Which is game 2, for those not intimately familiar with Legacy of Kain.
Yes. It had a data streaming game engine, which meant it eliminated the loading pauses. It's fast SSD. That's not actually what it was, but essentially. So it was a PlayStation game, but it ran much smoother and much faster than the original did. It was also full 3D. I believe they stayed full 3D onwards.
I think so. So that game was released in 1999. It focused on Raziel, like way in the future. in the vampire world that Kain rules over now, Raziel's like his first vampire he created. And of course, is going to betray Kain. Kain kills him. He rises from the dead. And now he's out for revenge.
No, he's not going to betray Kain, I feel like is important to note. He grew some wings.
That's a betrayal. You're not allowed to grow cool wings without telling your boss how you grew cool wings.
That is why he is sent to... that's why Kain gets rid of him, yeah.
Right, that's a betrayal.
He goes up to Kain, he's like, look, I just grew some cool wings. Kain's like, what the hell? You're not... what the heaven, I guess. You're not allowed to do that. Rips off his wings and then throws him out. So... I'm
just saying that if you showed up to record the podcast and you had wings,
you would murder me?
I'd be pissed. I wouldn't murder you because I'm not a vampire king who's reigned over my vampires for a millennia, but the equivalent of that.
Soul Reaver is also where fun industry history is Amy Hennig. She had worked a little bit with them on Blood Omen, but she took over as director for Soul Reaver 2 and Defiance. Best well known for the Uncharted series, which she made afterwards.
Which you can apparently see some sort of influence of Legacy of Kain on. No vampires, but the like single
bad
player.
Gameplay in the first one.
I don't think the first one. I don't know. I was just reading it's like, oh, like the kind of like the legacy of this like first player like cinematic story.
Oh yeah. I was just I was kidding.
Yes.
That's all.
But after Soul Reaver, things get weird. Things get Kingdom Heartsy. Was my vibe. I was like, oh, they released 2 games in 6 months. Next. Soul Reaver 2.
I believe that they were worked on by separate teams to a certain extent.
Still. Soul Reaver 2 and Blood Omen 2. Which is confusing. But the Soul Reaver timeline, like the future, like moving into the future, is like all about time travel, right? Like he's trying to kill Kain. Kain like tricks him into going into the past. And man, like in the end, like Raziel is trapped in some kind of like never-ending cycle of like killing his past self and then being trapped as a soul in what will become his weapon in a cycle that continues over and over and over, seemingly. That's dark. That's dark. Also wild.
Yeah.
And Blood Omen like takes you back to be like, how did Kain become the vampire king? Which doesn't seem that surprising because he's the only vampire, but whatever. Like, there's a game about it. And then it all comes together in Legacy of Kain Defiance in 2003, where both the teams work together on a game where you alternate control of both Kain and Raziel. But unfortunately it didn't sell very well. And the series was pretty much put on ice from there.
Yep.
Except it wasn't, because several games were started.
Yes. They trashed a whole bunch of Legacy of Kain titles.
So perhaps most notably a game that Climax Studios was working on, Dead Sun, right? Which they hated that title, apparently. They were like, it was a pun on like a child that gets killed in the beginning, but it didn't have anything to do with the game. But Square Enix said it focused grouped well. They wanted
the title,
like Vengeful Messiah or something, which I also think is pretty bad, but you know, you do you. Anyway, it sounds like that game, you know, this is a studio that generally was was a work for hire kind of studio, and it sounds like basically what had happened is that they said they could do the game for $15 million, which was super cheap, and so they got, you know, the contract, and then it turned out that that was a lie.
Yes.
But it did mean that a bunch of people worked for 3 years on a game that was never announced and never released.
As with a lot of games, to be honest.
Yep. But at the same time, like, so this game was supposed to be like a reboot in the future. They were like, people are not going to be able to follow, and rightly so, people are not going to be able to follow what happened in these first 5 games in the early aughts. that have a lot of time travel involved in them. And so they were like, we're gonna start in the future, right? We're gonna start fresh in the future, past that. And beside that, they were making a Nosgoth multiplayer game that sort of was supposed to bridge the gap a little bit between those two. That went into beta in 2015 and then also never actually released and shut down a year later.
Well, anyway, it would be nice if the main games, I guess, could be brought to... I guess they're on Windows, but it'd be nice if they could be brought up to modern consoles. But whether or not we will ever get a new Legacy of Kain game is... I am doubtful. Let's put it that way.
Soul Reaver is sort of mysteriously unavailable. Has been for a little while. I looked it up. I looked on Steam because I was like, I don't know, like if it's playable on Mac and it's like $5, maybe I'll get it. It's not playable on Mac. But Soul Reaver has a message on all platforms that's like, Crystal Dynamics has taken this game down for some necessary improvements. More updates soon.
Interesting.
It's like, what necessary improvements on a game that came out in 1999? But okay.
Maybe it's a crediting issue.
Maybe it's a crediting issue.
Well, shall we move on to the next one?
Yes. Tchia. Can I do that?
Yeah, it's not spelled like that, though.
I know it's not. It's not spelled like that. I'm also not even confident. It's fine. I didn't sing it very well. That's free advertising. It's been brought to you by...
That's how it goes. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So, Tchia is an open-world action-adventure from Awaseb. I didn't look up how to pronounce the studio name. I know how to pronounce the game.
Yes, it's Awaseb.
Published by Kepler Interactive with support from Kowloon Knights. And it came out in March. So Emma pulled this from the hat like literally as soon as it could be pulled.
I guess so.
Right? I mean, we've had like 3 weeks of like not this episodes.
Yeah.
So a fresh hat pick. Fresh from the hat. Anyway, as I alluded to in my opening joke, in Tchia, you play in a fictionalized version of New Caledonia, which is an island nation off the coast of Australia, as the titular Tchia. And your dad's been kidnapped by an evil-looking dude in a pollutant-looking helicopter thing, and you want to get him back. So you're going to go on a journey around your corner of the world to try to find your pa.
Yeah. Specifically, he seems to have been taken by someone who's working for, like, the guy who's ruling this area right now.
Yeah.
So,
Ganondorf.
The prologue section is essentially setting you up. You're trying to get an audience with him, but you have to, gather the materials for what is it? It's a kotum, right?
Yeah.
In order to give him, like, an offering so that you can get your meeting with him. So, you have to go around the islands, interact with different people, and get the stuff that you need in order to present him with a gift.
Unfortunately, though, not only do you have a Zelda glider at your disposal and a raft, but you also, there's something special about Tchia, which is that she can project her soul into pretty much anything around her. So that's all sorts of animals, inanimate objects.
Not people.
What?
Not people.
Not people, unfortunately. That's a... okay, I'm on my mashup game. I'm like, that's basically what happens with the Soul Reaver. Okay, we'll come back.
There is some soul crossover here.
We'll come back to the soul crossover. Wait for that.
Yeah.
But, you can... It means that you can sort of, like, use the abilities of animals or of objects around you to navigate the world and to solve puzzles and to blow things up occasionally. I've played about an hour and a half of Tchia so far. So my dad has been kidnapped. I did get the list of things that I've got to get for New Caledonian Ganondorf.
Yeah.
And it really does feel like that. You like walk up into like the middle of the city. It's like this huge like towery thing in the sky. I was like, oh, okay. I see the influence here.
Yeah. It reminds me, I mean, all roads lead back to Breath of the Wild, but it does remind me more specifically of Sable, which I played last year.
I see that.
Which is sort of Breath of the Wild-y in terms of like a stamina bar and like a small open world area, and you can do sorts of things. But Tchia, I've also played some of it, and I haven't gone and done this yet. There is some level of combat in Tchia.
Yeah.
And Sable has none. Both of them are definitely less combat heavy than I would consider something like Breath of the Wild to be.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I didn't really want this little girl to be doing a lot of, I don't know, breaking swords on the locals.
I think they're the cloth enemies that capture your dad at the start.
Yeah.
The guy comes with like these weird cloth people that I believe that you can find camps of and drive them out, essentially.
Nice. I'm looking forward to it. I do have to call out that in your stamina bar in this game, unlike in Breath of the Wild, where your stamina bar runs out and you like let go of what you're doing, right? You die. I mean, or you pass out. You pass out and wake up at the campfire when you run out of stamina.
Like when you're climbing things?
Yes.
Oh, I could have sworn I fell and then had to use my emergency glider, which I'm not very good at doing.
Is there an emergency glider? That's new.
Yes, there's an emergency glider.
Well, I haven't gotten to that point.
It doesn't get added. During my first playthrough, I spent a lot of time climbing the buildings up to the points of interest in the city so that I could do the little yell thing that marks everything.
Yeah.
And then I would jump off the building with my glider, realize, oh no, this is too high, fall for a bit, it'd be like emergency glider, and I'd do it, and then it'd still be too high, and then I'd bounce off the ground rather horrifyingly.
For me, I don't know. You get access to the boat, to the raft, and you're like, the opening kind of music is playing and the credits are playing, and you're like supposed to be steering your raft over to this island. And I was still sort of figuring out how the raft controls worked. And I don't know what I did. I did something where I was like on the raft. I was at the part where you're like, the part of the raft where you adjust the speed. But I don't know, maybe I climbed on it or something. I did something where my stamina bar went down in like 2 seconds. And I died in the middle of the title credit sequence.
Maybe a weird glitch. I don't know.
It was really embarrassing. I was like, what just
happened? If you run out while it's underwater, you do die.
There's a little bit of a grace period to that, though, I found.
Yes, a little bit, yeah.
Which is nice. Been pushing that a little bit already. Anyway, if you're getting the vibe, a lot of exploration, a lot of Assassin's Creed style climbing stuff. Breath of the Wild style climbing stuff. But there's like the tall things that you do your little, bird cry from. Much like in Assassin's Creed. I did appreciate that they've talked about in interviews like that it's inspired by Grand Theft Auto. In the sense that it was a game that you get to explore and that is where many of these developers are from. But I was like, don't say that. Don't say this game is inspired by Grand Theft Auto. That's not the energy of this game at all. What are you doing?
This game definitely reinforces what Sable taught me, which is like, I would like Breath of the Wild if it was like a fourth of the size that it is.
Yeah, that's why I felt like I could tackle this one. When I saw like the How Long to Beat and all the reviews are like 12 hours main story, I was like, well, it's not going to take me that long because as we know, I can't resist a collectible. But still, I was like,
get all of her cute outfits.
I know, I've been getting all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
I've got got a V-shaped ukulele now. We're gonna get decked out.
Yes, the ukulele is also very Ocarina of Time, I guess. Because you can play your soul melodies that'll help you let you change like the environment, whether it's like the time of day or probably like the weather is like another one you could get.
I think you mean it's very Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages.
Is that what I mean?
No. Well, who knows?
I could be.
Another game where you play a musical instrument.
Yes.
You know what? Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages, not a bad crossover between these two games. No vampires, but the vibes are there. Anyway. I'm in like big crossover mode today. But there's tons and tons and tons of mini games in Tchia, which you might have already picked up from us talking about this. But in just my hour and a half of playing, I've already played a couple of rhythm games. I like the ukulele a lot more than leaf percussion. Because it's like you kind of like do the wheel around and then you strum, which I thought was creative. Although maybe is that exactly how it is in The Last of Us? I was seeing some stuff that's like, this is from The Last of Us.
I think you use the touchpad in The Last of Us.
Of course you
it's
do.
A little bit more immersive than that.
Yeah.
But a lot of games have adopted the like wheel format for when you're
It's the first time I'd seen it because I'm behind the time. So I was like, that's neat. Fun. There's a rock stacking game where you have to build a rock tower to unlock some music powers. I found this impossible. Why are you laughing at me?
I also found it impossible. If you just keep pressing square, eventually it'll work in the end.
I like
the ugliest rock pile ever known to man.
The first time I tried it, I'd gotten it up to about half the height it needed to be, and I just I was like, okay, we gotta start over. I set this up wrong. I find it really hard to rotate the rock to the direction I want it to be, too.
Yeah.
Like, what I always, like, there's, like, one angle you can't turn it on at any given time, and it's like, that's the angle I want to turn it on. And then I've done some of the races, I've done the slingshot shooting gallery. There's tons and tons and tons of, like, little mini games all over the place, which I enjoy. I like a map full of stuff.
Yeah.
Elden Ring, this is not.
Yeah. So the mythology is sort of Tchia is loosely based on the mythology of the Kanak people in New Caledonia, which is essentially the word for the indigenous population versus like the French population that's been there for a while now. What?
Colonizers.
Yeah. It is, the New Caledonia is still a French territory technically.
Something?
Yeah. And it also uses it uses both French and Drehu, which is one of the indigenous languages there, like the dominant indigenous language. So people who live there tend to use like a combination of their indigenous language and French, and that's how it's presented in the game as well. So like from the scenes I've seen so far, like Tchia uses Drehu with her family and friends, and when she's going to visit the big guy in the sky or whatever, the receptionist and her are using French to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently this was a design challenge because there aren't a lot of people who speak Drehu, and especially not a lot of actors who speak Drehu specifically. So apparently they had to do a lot of scouting to try to find people who could voice the characters in the game. And sometimes it didn't work, and sometimes it worked, and apparently it was a lot of work to do any sort of voice acting for this.
Well, it seems like the only reason it ended up working out at all is that the studio's like HR manager, I mean, they're a 9-person studio, so like everyone's doing everything, right? Yeah. But the studio's HR manager, who's like who grew up in New Caledonia before moving to France.
A lot of the studio is actually New Caledonian. It's set in France, but on their FAQ they specifically say you can't really we can't really set up a game studio in New Caledonia.
Which, fair.
Yeah.
If nothing else, the time zones for talking to publishers would probably be.
But like the two founders, for instance, are also from New Caledonia, or childhood friends, in fact.
But the reason it seems like they were able to find actors at all is that this woman had grown up like doing some performances with the community theater in the capital. She like describes it as like her parents wanted her to be an actor and she like rebelled by being a communications manager, basically. But because she knew those people, she was like, okay, I know where to start. So like there's only so many actors, like I can reach out to these people because I know this community. And so she ended up being the person who like did go out and like manage a lot of the kind of like casting and recording, which is such a, you know, what a funny small studio thing, right?
Yeah. They did, I think she also was like the arranger of the trip that they sent the studio on, like all 9 of them. Spent like 2 weeks there, essentially, in order to make sure that they were meeting the people. And they also took the opportunity to show them the game first, for instance, which there's like this really detailed Game Informer article because there was a porter there with them as well. But one of the founders was like, he was way more nervous about showing Tchia here than he was at like any presentation that it was at, which understandable, to be honest.
Definitely. I really feel like that deserves a feature like the Yakuza Play Yakuza feature.
Yeah.
I would like the glider reactions.
If only that worked in real life, to be honest.
If only gliders were a thing.
Really, honestly.
Unsurprisingly, something else that I want to register that all of these things that I'm saying I'm struggling with about the game are like me problems, right? I actually don't think any of these are game things. They're just like, I'm bad at things. So it's like, I can't do the rock. I'm bad at the rock stacking because my 3D spatial awareness, I think I'm deficient, basically.
I think we would just be bad at rock stacking in real life too.
No.
So.
Well, thanks, Emma. I appreciate that. But
I said we. Okay,
don't loop me in with you. I'm fine at Jenga. But also, it's interesting to me, and I appreciate this. I'm like, this is a fun choice, if one that is making my life harder. Is that the map system is interesting. In that you don't at all times have like a GPS tracker on where you are. You do when you're on your boat, which
yes.
I do appreciate that nod to please don't let me get totally lost in the middle of the ocean or totally turned around. Like that I've been abusing a little bit. But when you're on land or just moving around as Tchia, you don't like your mini map doesn't just say like, oh, here's where you are. It says this is the last place that you looked at like a waypoint, basically, and we can circle that. But like other than that, you need to make sure you're headed in the right direction. Oh.
You do, so hot tip for Madelyn, in case you haven't figured this out yet, you did get a compass.
Yes, right? I've been abusing the compass too.
Yeah, so if you click in on the R stick, you can either have like a small map or you can just have your compass up. And it does point you the way that if you put down like a little thumbtack on your map, that'll show up on your compass. So it can help you sort of navigate to where you want to go.
Basically, I'm just anticipating, because he does this to me in real life when we're going places, so I'm sure he'll feel even more empowered to do it when I'm just running around in a game. I anticipate Clickbait Boyfriend making fun of me. He was on a call while I was playing this hour and a half, and so I didn't have to humiliate myself by being like, what direction am I going? Or like, I ran my boat aground on an island, and I like couldn't figure out how to fix that. I started
push it.
She wouldn't push.
She wouldn't push?
How do you push? Anyway, I just started I started a race, my boat respawned in the water. It was fine. But I was like, uh-oh, have I ruined my boat? Have I lost access to my boat an hour in by running around on a stupid island because I still haven't quite internalized how my little rudder works?
No, you can push things with square if you're next to them.
You know, I did sort of know that.
Or you can pick up a cat and just absolutely yuck it.
Yeah, I did that to a bird. I did do that to a bird, which is appropriate for me. I also started the game by just being like, oh, I'm going to pick up everything I see. And it was like, oh, I only have a certain number of spots.
Yeah, and I think the first thing I did is I, like, picked up a cat. I saw the prompt, like, throw. I was like, can't mean throw, right? It does. In fact, mean just chuck that cat.
I do miss my piggy friend who I left behind. It's a good piggy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, not like the most like cutting edge of graphics or anything like that, but like a really like a pretty and colorful game. Dope soundtrack.
Yeah.
Reminds you of Grand Theft Auto. No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly like Grand Theft Auto.
And
actually, that is my one. I bet I can soul possess them now, but when I was in like the big city, I was like, I really wish I could ride this bike that I found. So maybe it should have been more like Grand Theft Auto.
They have a lot of ladders around for her not being able to climb ladders.
If you jump on them correctly and climb, it doesn't take up your stamina bar.
Okay, well, I'm gonna need a tutorial.
It's a little finicky. A little finicky, the ladders.
Anyway. I would recommend Tchia. I haven't gotten to play that much with like what seems to be the main fun mechanic of the game, which is the soul throwing. So probably more on that in the 6-week recap coming in 5 weeks. But I'm really enjoying it so far. It is gonna get in the way. Talkless ruins my plans to like play games. I like start new games for Talk This every couple of weeks. Then it's like, oh, I have to play this. I have to play this. I have to play this. And when it's something like Trine, where we're now going to have to play through all 4 of them. Devastating. Right.
All 5 of them, even.
Well, the 5th one, I was saying this with my boyfriend, we're going to have to play that one, like, online co-op. Wow.
Oh, tragic. All right, let's do our mashup.
Oh, I don't know. I've, like, proposed, like, 4 mashups already. You have to start.
You're right, you have. There's more overlap than you'd think. There's souls. There's animal transformations. There's,
That's all you got, huh?
That's what I got.
I mean, the Legend of Zelda influence.
There's the Zelda, that's right.
Okay. Let's see. I mean, I like vampires on gliders.
Deeply funny.
It's interesting, right? Like, do we take, like, I don't know if we take New Caledonia specifically, or if we take the idea of, like, okay, it's set in a very specific place where games are often not set. Like, that might feel more interesting than being like, it's New Caledonia, but now there's vampires.
Doing this would require, obviously, some actual research, but doing some research into, like, various types of vampire or vampire-related mythos from around the world and trying to find one that's not Bram Stoker.
Right.
Would be interesting, I think.
I like that. A new take on the undead, or an old take on the undead, likely. A new take for games on the undead.
Because, every culture has their own folklore, and a lot of folklore has vampire-like creatures, so I feel like we could find something there.
Which game's mechanics do we want to take, though?
It's whether you go into the thing or whether you suck up the thing is really the question, huh?
I don't like that paradigm, to be perfectly honest.
I don't like the way I phrase it either.
You could do something with, like, okay, so you've got the idea of, like, your sword being able to take on, or your weapon being able to take on different attributes, maybe.
You might say fuse things to your sword.
Stop that. I haven't even watched any of those videos. Oh, I thought I had come up with something, and you're right. It's just... I can't believe the people at Nintendo were like, you know what 2 games we should take inspiration from for Tears of the Kingdom? I'm not gonna believe it. Oh, okay, so not that. Cool. Maybe it's like instead of like eating souls, you're like collecting souls somehow.
Okay.
I hope that's not what you do in Dark Souls. You're not like collecting souls in Dark Souls, right? That's not like a thing.
They are called souls.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Great. So not that. Okay. All games have
No,
already been
that
made.
doesn't have to be like for your level up mechanic. Like we can still have you collecting souls. Maybe you need to collect them in order to do some sort of offering or something. That's essentially what you're doing in both games, right?
Yes.
In Soul Reaver,
Yeah.
more specifically.
Or it's like maybe there are other souls. Again, this would have to be based in like we have to find a mythology that supported this. But like there's other souls that have not been able to go to rest, right? And maybe like I've created like if we wanted to take Greek mythology, I've created you as like Charon, but a vampire roaming the world.
Okay.
Like that's the energy of it. Of like, okay, you have to like get these souls and like fulfill their little quests to bring them to rest. But also it's a vampire, so it's like dark. Like it's not gonna be able to be like pastel world. It's gonna have to be like dark world.
Okay.
Or maybe you can jump between the two. There's a lot of that in the various Legacy of Kains, like some light world jumping.
We got some stuff here.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave it there. There's so much potential here. But listeners, do you have ideas of how to mash these two games? Do you love the Legacy of Kain series? If they're gonna remake it, do you want them to do Blood Omen or do you want them to do Soul Reavers? Soul Reaver. That's the big hot question. Have you played Tchia? Do you think vampires could have gliders or would they just turn into a bat? Would a vampire use a glider? If you're a writer for What We Do in the Shadows, I feel like I'm giving you something here, but
yeah,
think about it. Anyway, that's it for this show. Thanks for listening to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
If you enjoyed what you listened to today, check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. You should also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. And finally, and most importantly, you should subscribe to the show. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today, subscribe to Talk This. Next week it's my side quest. I don't know, man. I wish we had this one about like resurrecting vampires on Easter. That would have been pretty good. But I don't know what mine is going to be about. Games for when it's suddenly really hot. Games about heat. We'll find out next week. But Emma, what are we going to be talking about in 2 weeks at the end of April?
In 2 weeks, we are going to be talking about Tactics Ogre for our old game. Mm-hmm. And Wild Hearts for our new game.
All right. I always think Tactics Ogre is such a funny title.
It's the ogre that does tactics.
That's what I always think. I'm like, you're like an ogre tactician.
Yeah.
So look forward to that in a couple of weeks. But listeners, that's our show. Emma, do you have a wish for our listening public this week?
This week, I hope that you are not descended upon by vampires with gliders.